This is The Morning Shift.
Radio Whānau, we've got someone special on the show today. We call him special because he's well qualified to be special. His name is Jeffrey Miller. He's a geopolitical analyst and he's from Aotearoa. And we've got him on the show because there's a lot going on. A lot happened over the weekend and there's a lot of questions to be asked. And no pressure on you, Jeffrey, but ultimately we're looking to you for answers. But welcome into the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys. It's a great honour.
No worries. So can I just start off at the very beginning? What is a geopolitical analyst? Like, how do you become that? What were you into at high school? What do you do?
Look, it sounds grand perhaps, but it's a bit more mundane than that. Look, I'm completing a PhD at the University of Otago in politics on New Zealand's relations with the Gulf states. And when you study politics, you like to write about politics. So a few years ago, I started writing a lot on politics, on what's happening in the world, and particularly New Zealand's perspective. And you soon get rung up for interviews. And I was called at one stage a geopolitical analyst by one of the media outlets. It might have been the New Zealand Herald. And I thought, oh, that's quite a cool title. I actually quite like that. So I started using it, and I found it works really well to describe kind of what I like to do, which is to look at what's happening in the world, see how New Zealand fits into it, and just explain it in a way that everyone can understand. So I try and just break everything down, because in the end, all of this stuff affects us. What happens in the world, even if it's way over in the Middle East, it affects us right here in New Zealand. If only because if you go down to the petrol station tomorrow or next week, you'll probably find it costs you a bit more to fill up your tank of petrol, and that's as a direct consequence of what's happening in the Middle East. The price of oil has spiked as we record this on Monday morning. The price of oil is now about $80 a barrel. Well, it was 60 back in April. So we're on the way up. And you recall back in 2022, some of your listeners will remember after Russia invaded Ukraine, remember all that inflation we had and all the prices of everything going up in the supermarkets? All of that was to do with the price of oil as well, because oil is part of everything that we use, all the trucks that take all of our food to market, all of that requires oil, all the ships, all the aircraft. So oil just fundamentally drives inflation. So that's just one example of how things that can happen a world away, 15,000 kilometres away, can affect us right here in New Zealand.
I guess that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
What is
really
going on? Like over the weekend, we saw, there was out of nowhere, it felt like, for just the mundane like myself, it felt like Israel came out of nowhere, attacked Iran to take down some, what they were calling the idea behind nuclear weapons, a program that was looking towards making nuclear weapons. And then, a couple of days later, the US, who had said nothing, all of a sudden they're involved in it now, and they've got jets in the fight, and all of a sudden it feels like things are getting really tense.
Yeah, indeed. And it's a long and complicated story, Mark, going way back to 1979. That was the year that Iran was subject to a revolution. There was the Islamic Revolution of 1979, and Iran went in quite a different direction. Before that, it had the Shah, a monarch, and who was very Western friendly, but also ruled with an iron fist. And he was very loathed by many Iranian people because of the secret police, torture chambers, all these kinds of things. So there was an Islamic revolution, and the new team in town, they have taken a position which is against Israel, and it's against the United States. They see Israel as the little Satan and the United States as the great Satan. And part of their program has been to build a nuclear energy program. And there is suspicion in the United States and the West, there has been for many years, that this is cover for building a nuclear weapons program. So Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, he has spoken out about this for decades and says that Iran can't be allowed to have a nuclear weapon because they want to destroy Israel, and they could use that nuclear weapon conceivably to destroy Israel. And so he's been very vocal about that, and this is why Israel has now gone in and bombed Iran's nuclear sites over the past couple of weeks. And the United States has now come in over the weekend to help it do that. So for a long time, there was a lot of talk about diplomatic solutions. There was a nuclear deal with Iran signed back in 2015. Donald Trump withdrew from that in 2018, tore that up and said, I'm not going to be part of that. And we now are in Donald Trump's second term, and the time, it seems, is now for a military solution in the eyes of the United States and Israel. And it is quite scary, because we haven't had this full-on head-to-head confrontation between Israel and Iran before. Before last year, we had two very small rounds of tit-for-tat fire in April and October 2024. But before that, we'd never seen a direct confrontation between Israel Israel and Iran. And before this weekend, we'd never had a direct confrontation between the United States and Iran. It is unprecedented, and it's a huge escalation.
Absolutely. I think one of, Jeffrey, I think in particular for Gen Z and for a lot of people really 30 and under, we are consuming our news now like solely on social media. And it's been one thing since I've been following this Iran-Israel conflict since it started a few weeks ago, trying to filter what I watch and what I process. And what I'm starting to realize is that you can't really have a grasp on what's accurate and what's going on unless you're willing to read these independent journalists, read journalists on the ground like yourself, because there's a lot of inaccurate information out there. What we're seeing in America right now, though, is quite interesting because Trump had positioned himself as an America First president. He had lobbied his campaign around America First, as we know, and really anti-war, you could argue. As someone who analyzes the moves that Trump's just made in the last week, and even seeing the backlash of some of the Republican Party around the decision to bomb those 3 sites in Iran without it going to Congress or there being a debate about it. What in your opinion, is there a red flag there in terms of the process that Trump has taken? Also the hypocrisy, some could argue, around bombing a country then saying we can talk peace now. For us who really are casual, that don't have a really in-depth understanding of what's always going on, but we're so informed by the visual aspect of what we see on social media. How have you processed what Trump's done in the last week?
Oh, you make some great points there, Jordan. I reckon you'd be a good geopolitical analyst, to be honest. But look, there are so many inconsistencies, aren't there? And you're absolutely right. Donald Trump spoke out about foreign wars. He was highly critical of American presidents going to the Middle East, starting wars that they couldn't get out of. You recall the United States was embroiled for 20 years in Afghanistan. He was highly critical of that. And Donald Trump was critical of the Iraq war, although initially he did actually support it. But later on, he was very critical of it. And he was very critical of the idea of America bombing Iran. He was always criticizing Barack Obama for considering bombing Iran, in his view. So he said other presidents are going to do these kinds of things. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stay out of war. I'm going to make America great again, as he said. But yet there's also a strong wing in the Republican Party, the neoconservative wing, that want to bomb Iran, that are very strongly behind Israel, and they want to finish the job, as they would see it, and destroy these nuclear facilities, and even go for more. They want regime change, many of them. And I'm talking about the likes of Marco Rubio, who is the Secretary of State, the Foreign Minister in the United States. I'm talking about Pete Hegseth, who's the Defense Secretary. Ted Cruz, some of your listeners might have seen some clips last week. He went on a podcast hosted by... So he went on a podcast.
He got what we call a hiding, I think.
Yeah. So Tucker Carlson, very much from that more isolation wing of the Republican Party, who say no more foreign wars. It just get America into debt. We get into situations we can't get out of, and we're not improving the economic situation at home. So no more foreign wars. And Tucker Carlson interviewed Ted Cruz, the Republican senator who's very much behind Israel and wanted to bomb Iran. And Tucker Carlson asked Ted Cruz how many people live in Iran, and he had no idea, couldn't even guess. And he asked, well, what else do you know about Iran? And Ted Cruz could only give some vague statements. He clearly had no idea about the country. And Tucker Carlson, I think, made quite rightly the point, well, how can you consider toppling the government of a country you know nothing about? So there are lots of inconsistencies and contradictions, but I don't think consistency has ever been Donald Trump's strong point. He flails around and just, I think he listens to the last person he talks to, and then he reflects that back. So at the moment, the Hawks have Donald Trump's ear, and he's listening to the Hawks. He's listening to Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister. He's listening to the Hawks and the Republican Party, who are all egging him on, saying, finish the job, Mr. President. Let's go and bomb this Fordo nuclear facility. Let's use these big bunker-busting bombs and destroy these facilities. These bombs weigh 13,000 kilograms each.
And who are the Hawks, Jeffrey?
The United States dropped 14 of them.
Who are the Hawks? I saw Putin doing an interview. He was saying how the left and right really doesn't matter. A president can come into term with the best intentions of trying to change and do what they say, but men in black suits with blue and black ties and briefcases walk alongside them and actually tell them what is going to happen. So who are the Hawks? And we can talk about AIPAC and other influences within the Senate and within government, but are we allowed to know who the Hawks are?
Look, we often talk about a military-industrial complex, and war is a business. And there is a huge defense lobby in the United States because there are companies like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and so on. They make huge amounts of money from war, and they donate, right? They donate to political parties, they donate to candidates, and they donate to many of these Republicans who are in Congress, and they are then advocating for war. And it is a real thing. It's not a conspiracy theory. In the end, following the money is always a good idea, and pretty much anywhere in life, right? Follow the money, and you usually find the answers. So the military-industrial complex explains a good part of what we're seeing. AIPAC, which is the Israeli lobby in the United States, effectively, which also has religious motivations. I mean, it's not all about money, but evangelical Christians see it as their duty to support Israel. That was Ted Cruz's line: "I'm a Christian, so I have a duty to support Israel." So there's a religious dimension. Republicans tend to be more religious, or the evangelical Christian wing tends to coalesce around Republicans these days. So when you add religion, you add money, you add military defense companies, you end up with a pretty strong alliance. And Donald Trump was very much going against the tide when he was saying no more wars and no more forever wars, and I'm not going to do this American adventurism in the Middle East. He was going against the tide. He was pushing back against the neoconservatives led by George W. Bush. Jeb Bush, if you recall, way back in 2016, some of your listeners might recall, Jeb Bush was on the stage with Donald Trump, and Jeb Bush was saying a whole lot of hardline things, and Donald Trump mocked him, said, "Oh yeah, you're a tough guy, Jeb," and Donald Trump was very strong, saying that it was a disaster, the Iraq War, back in 2016 when he was on the campaign trail the first time around. But he's always been persuadable, Donald Trump, and as I say, you can never guarantee which way he's going to go. And I just think now the Hawks have got his ear, and that anti-war element to Donald Trump is just gone, or at least for now. But who knows?
Absolutely.
Next week it might be different, or next year. You just never know with Donald Trump. But he's just been posting on his Truth Social talking about regime change, which makes you think that there's going to be more to come.
Yeah.
With in terms of the war with Iran.
Yeah, it's a horrible time in human history, and when we look back at this time, it's going to stand out, and it's going to be extremely loud. But what do you expect to come out of NATO? Where do you kind of think New Zealand will stand? It's just to everything you've kind of said already, it is such a scary time, and I think especially living so far away from it, you can kind of feel disconnected from it all. But like you said,
I don't tell that little NZ plane get back to New Zealand. I think.
Yeah, what do we matter? Do we play any role in this?
No, look, let's unpack some of these things. Look, NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And if that sounds like a mouthful, it's the world's premier military and political alliance, or the West's premier military and political alliance. And it, as the name says, it's focused on North America and Europe. So why is New Zealand there? Well, New Zealand is being invited as a partner country of NATO to its annual summit. And this has happened for 4 years in a row now, since 2022. And so Christopher Luxon is heading there to The Hague in the Netherlands for this summit. And the significance of that is that you're going to have everyone there in the room from the West, from North America and Europe and Japan and South Korea and Australia as well. And you'll have Donald Trump himself, if he goes. I mean, I think there's a question mark over that, given the war situation we're in, but he's scheduled to be there. Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, the new German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, they'll all be there. Emmanuel Macron from France, they'll all be there in the room, and Christopher Luxon will be there as well. So it is unusual for New Zealand to be at the top table with a lot of hawk, to be honest, because NATO is just fundamentally very hawkish. It's a military grouping, and they do look for military solutions. Really, that's the way that they see the world. They see the world in terms of threats, not in terms of opportunity. And the new NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who's from the Netherlands himself, he gave a speech a couple of weeks ago where he talked about Russia, Iran, China, all teaming up together, North Korea, all teaming up together and working together. And this is where New Zealand really comes in, because NATO is increasingly taking a global approach, not just looking at Russia, but they're looking at China and seeing China as a real threat. And they're wanting New Zealand to come in and provide solidarity with them on that. And there's some real question marks, I think, in my view, because China is New Zealand's biggest trading partner. And Christopher Luxon, New Zealand Prime Minister, was up in China just last week, shaking hands with Xi Jinping, Li Qiang. We rely on China to sell almost a third of our export to China every year. All that milk powder and butter and so forth, all of that's going to China. That's why butter costs so much in the shops now, because there's so much strong demand, not just from China, but around the world world, but China is New Zealand's biggest export market, and yet we are being called upon to come in to support NATO's desire to contain China, and NATO is always calling out what they see as China's assertive position and ambitions and coercive diplomacy and all of these words that they use in their statements. And New Zealand is being being brought in really give more credibility and legitimacy to that. So I think there are real questions about whether that's the right approach, or whether New Zealand would be better to take a more independent approach. And that's really what is often talked about, that New Zealand has an independent foreign policy where we get on with everyone and we try and get on with China and get on with the United States and get on with the Europeans, and try and stay out of these big conflicts and play more of a mediating role. When things go wrong, New Zealand can be there and we get on well with everyone so we can talk to everyone. I think that's probably actually the better approach for New Zealand to take, but it's not the one that New Zealand seems to be taking at the moment.
Absolutely. I just have one more question from me personally. I don't know how to ask this, but one of our flexes is Tulsi Gabbard, actually follows the podcast. She is Director of National Intelligence, I think, for the United States, and she reported, I think, back in April, that there was no evidence that there was a nuclear warhead in Iran based on their intelligence. And when President Trump was asked that last week, he basically said that Tulsi and their information, they've got it wrong. He knows what's going on. We also know that there was negotiations between Trump and Iran, or there were talks about it before Netanyahu, or before Israel decided to kind of interrupt that. Is it really? Do you think, in your expert opinion, that it is about nuclear weapons, or is there another reason why they're so invested in what Iran's business is?
Oh, Tulsi Gabbard. Oh, well, if you're listening, Tulsi, listen to what Jordan is saying there, because I think he's saying a lot of good things. Look, I think it was really interesting with Tulsi Gabbard, because she did come out as the Director of National Intelligence with that assessment back in, I think it was actually February, saying that Iran was not building a nuclear weapon as things stood. That was their assessment. And then Donald Trump was asked about this, and he says, I don't care what she says, whatever, I'm the president. And then actually on Saturday, she walked back those comments somewhat and said that she was misquoted, essentially by the fake news media, quote unquote.
Oh, wow.
And you could tell that she was doing that for the boss. Okay. Maybe she'd been lent on and told to, either put out a statement saying that she agreed with the president on this, or she'd be sacked. So she put that statement out. And then there were photos that came out of the White House Situation Room. She wasn't in them. Apparently there was a list released later. She was there, we're led to believe, but it was noticeable that she wasn't in any of the early photos that were released where this operation was announced. And normally you would expect the DNI, as they call her, to be there. So she's kind of reflective of that more skeptical wing of the Republican Party who are against the foreign interventionism. And I think the thing is, when you ask about whether it's just the nuclear sites or whether it's something more than that, I think this is the thing, when any war happens, you end up with mission creep. So it will start off with striking the nuclear facilities, but you're already seeing that Donald Trump, just as I say, as we record this on Monday morning, just a couple of hours ago, he's posted talking about regime change. And that's what many of the hawks want. They want to take down Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, and the whole Islamic Republic in Iran. And I just think it's madness, because what are you going to end up with? And are Iranians going to be really amenable to the United States after having their country bombed to smithereens? Probably not. You're going to end up with a worse situation, not a better one. And if you want proof of that, just look at Iraq and look at what's happened in the Middle East over the last 20 years. Are we in a better place or a worse place than we were 20 years ago? I think that
all those weapons they found,
that question speaks for itself.
Yeah. Hey, Jeffrey, we do have to bring this to a close, but thank you so much for your time and energy. I just want my final parting piece, because you are studying, you're writing your thesis, and this is your zone, right? This geopolitical analysis, this is kind of where you're strong in, and we can actually turn to you when it comes to how do we know what's true and what's not. We've got these algorithms that throw. How do you do it? How do you deal with it? And perhaps some tips to take away with.
Look, hey, great question. Look, I'm a bit of a news hound, so I spend more time on X probably than other social media platforms, just because X is all about news. But I'm on all of the platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, whatever. I'll go on all of them and read. And I just think that's the best way to do it, is to just try and go everywhere. If you're interested, just don't believe the first thing that you read, because goodness me, there's so many fake images and fake news out there. And a number of times I read something, I think, wow, has that happened? And then you read the replies, oh no, this is an AI image or whatever. So read widely, and then go back to trust sources. If you want to just have a quick overview of what's really gone on, a view of the world that's been fact checked to some degree, go to one of the reputable sources, go to the BBC or the CNN or the Guardian. They're not perfect and they have their own flaws and they're not as exciting exciting, to be honest, the social media, which is a bit like the Wild West, but at least you know that there's some verification going on. So if you read something you think, oh wow, this has happened, this is amazing, just go and check the BBC first before you believe it, because sometimes things are just not true, what you read on social media. But look, they are the first draft in a way of journalism these days, social media. So it's like, and there's a lot going on, and with following the situation, I'll see something on X and it will be 10 hours or 12 hours before it gets in the news media. So you can see everything first as it happens. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, you're interested in seeing the world going to hell in a handbasket. I mean, social media is quite a good place to watch, and you do feel, I think, when we're sitting here in New Zealand, I think this is one of these times, a bit like with COVID, we actually quite like our isolation and being away from the hotspot, but you can listen in and watch and see what's happening. And I think knowledge is power, and I think that's the first step to solving all of these conflicts, to find out what's happening. But then I think you need to speak out in favour of peace, dialogue, diplomacy, de-escalation, and you can't accept this kind of escalation. And I think Christopher Luxon, the New Zealand Prime Minister, should be speaking out quite strongly at NATO this week, saying, look, you have your differences with Iran, but this is not the way to do it.
We know he's not going to do that, Jeffrey. Let's be honest. He's not capable of doing that.
I will keep pushing the case for that, because it's imperative, and it's going to make a bad situation even worse, what we've seen over the weekend. And it's not the right way to do things. So, as I said, it is madness what we're seeing at the moment.
Love that. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Thanks, guys. Great to chat.
This is The Morning Shift.